You film some epic nighttime scenes, edit them beautifully, color them like a blockbuster movie, and then you notice this. And you're like, how am I gonna fix this? Well, this is where this video comes in, where you're going to learn how to remove color noise and grain in both the free version and studio version of DaVinci Resolve, when, where, and how to implement both methods in your editing workflow, and how to recover your details if the denoising is too strong on your footage or you just want more details. Now, I'm going to start with the free method because most of you probably are using the free version of DaVinci Resolve, so it's only fair, and then move over to the studio version. You also have chapters down below with timestamps if you're interested in a specific part of the video. Now, let's jump in Resolve. The tool for the free method is located in the Fusion page, so let's jump into Fusion. And with the media in selected, press Shift Spacebar and search for Remove Noise. Add it in. Let's also zoom to 200%. And as you can see, by default, the tool gives us all the color channels separate in both color and chroma tab. Having them separate like this gives us the flexibility to edit noise and grain on each individual channel, which results in better noise reduction overall. If you lock them, you'll get only 2 sliders for softness and detail, and even if you set the sliders all the way to the maximum, you'll not get very good results, as you can see. Don't get me wrong, this lock method can help your footage if there is very little amount of noise in it, but the end results are a bit inferior when compared to using the channels unlocked. Now let's unlock them and get to denoising. As you see, all 3 RGB channels are separated into 2 categories, softness and detail, and they are separated like this because the noise pattern differs for each individual channel. Now let's switch to the red channel, and to do this, go above the viewer to the 3 circle icon and click on the drop down menu and select red. Now we only see the red channel and the noise within. Let's start with red softness, just somewhere around here. Then red detail. Let's crank it all the way up. Okay, let's click on the value and type in 1.05 and set this value as a starting point. Okay, this looks good. Now, by default, some sliders in DaVinci Resolve will have a preset value of 0 as minimum and 1 as maximum. But as you saw, you can change the value of the minimum or the maximum by typing in your own value. Also, keep in mind that with both free and studio methods of denoising, there is still a balancing act you need to do between the settings because each scene is unique and it has its own unique noise in it. But fear not, there are a few settings that can be used as best settings. Now let's switch to the green channel, but instead of using the drop-down menu, I'm going to click on the icon and press G on the keyboard. And yes, you can navigate the channels by pressing R for red, G for green, and B for blue, and also C for all colors. But first, you have to click on the icon so you let DaVinci know that you're going to use the channel switcher. Otherwise, the keyboard won't work. And now we're going to do the same process we did for the red channel. So softness green. Next, detail green. Let's also type in 1.05 for green and go from there as a starting point. Good, now let's switch to blue. Also, keep in mind, the blue channel will always have more noise than the red and green due to the nature of the color blue, since it's darker than red and green, which are brighter. Let's switch back to all colors and toggle on and off the effect. Okay, this looks acceptable for the color channels. Now let's move on to the Chroma tab. The Chroma tab has only Luma and Chroma itself separated into softness and detail. Luma stands for luminance or brightness, and Chroma stands for chrominance, which is responsible for the overall color balance and is separated from the luminance. Think of it like this. Luma is responsible for that grain-like type of noise that you find in your darker and brighter areas in your footage, and Chroma is responsible for that green magenta type of noise that you find it everywhere where your colors intersect. So basically, after you remove the noise from each individual channel, you're going to switch over to the Chroma tab and remove it from where the colors intersect. And as with the color sliders, you have to do the same balancing act. Also, make sure to zoom in and zoom out from time to time to see the overall footage. This way, you're going to work in a zoomed in detail view and also in a bigger picture kind of view. And also, you don't have to stick to 200%, you can go to 100 or 50 and have a look at how this looks. Now, this looks good. So from here, you can start doing your color grade, sharpness, or add animations on top of your footage. And this is it for the free version noise removal. Now I'm going to switch to the studio version, which is in the color page. In the middle toolbar, you'll see the motion effects palette. Click on it. And here you are presented with 3 columns: temporal noise reduction, spatial noise reduction, and motion blur. Temporal noise reduction analyzes your image across multiple frames to determine what is noise in your image and isolate it from the detail, and only apply noise reduction to that isolated portion of the image. Spatial noise reduction, on the other hand, allows you to smooth out regions of high frequency noise throughout the entire image while attempting to avoid smoothing by preserving detail. Basically, spatial noise reduction takes care of the noise that temporal noise reduction cannot. And because of this, spatial noise reduction is a bit more resource intensive than temporal noise reduction. So as a workflow, first use temporal noise, get rid of as much noise as you can, then come in with spatial noise if you need to fine-tune the image and refine the noise reduction process. And finally, motion blur. This tool adds artificial motion blur to your footage if your footage does not have any motion blur from its source. For example, high frame rate footage, or if you have screen recordings that you want to have motion blur on them. Now, the order of operations, as mentioned previously, is to start with temporal noise reduction. Here we have frames where you can choose from 0 to 5. And this is the number of frames you want to resolve to average in order to separate detail from noise. So let's say you place your playhead at frame 5, for example, and choose 3 frames. Then Resolve will look 3 frames backwards and 3 frames forwards from your current frame to determine what is noise and apply noise reduction to it while preserving detail. Here I can give you 2 best settings to use. First one is 2 frames, which is perfect for low to medium noise in your footage, and it's also not so processor or GPU intensive. And setting number 2 is 3 frames. This is for medium to heavy or heavy amounts of noise in your footage. It is a bit more resource hungry than 2 frames, but you can still work with it. Anything above 3 frames is used for footage that has extreme noise in it. But if you do have to go to 4 or 5, keep in mind that even the most powerful computers can slow down or even crash under these 2 settings, especially if you use 5 frames. Next is motion estimation type, which lets you pick the method Resolve uses to detect motion in the image. The default, faster, is less processor intensive, but less accurate. Choosing better can effectively exclude motion more accurately, but it is more processor intensive. Here, I advise you to set it to better. I have tested it with 7-year-old hardware and it worked fine without any issues. Next is motion range, which lets you set the speed of motion that motion estimation should expect to exclude. Here, use small or medium if you have slow moving subjects with little motion blur. If you have fast moving subjects like high speed movement, then use large. Best setting here is the default medium, because if you're not filming a fight scene or a chase scene, which is most of the time high speed where you would use the large setting, medium will do the job just fine. Next, let's move to temporal threshold. Here we have Luma and Chroma, which lets you determine how much or how little temporal noise reduction to apply to the Luma component of the image or the Chroma component of the image. Here you can go from 0, which means no noise reduction at all, to 100, which makes your footage into soft mush. Also, leaving both at 100 will slow down your computer significantly. Now, by default, both settings are linked, which allows you to set Luma and Chroma at the same time at the same value. This is not a bad thing. By all means, if it helps your video, leave them linked and use them like that. But if you need to control them individually, just unlink them and then adjust them as you need. Now let's go over the last 2 options, and then I'm going to show you how to set up Luma and Chroma to get the best out of both of them. So the motion threshold determines how much movement in a video is considered significant, influencing whether the temporal noise reduction applies noise reduction to slower or faster moving pixels. Here I recommend leaving it at the default value, which is 50, because you get the best of both worlds, and from personal experience I never had to change the settings to get very good results. And finally, blend. This one is pretty generic in every program. It lets you blend your noise reduction with your footage. 0 means the noise reduction would be at full effect, and 100 means the noise reduction is disabled. Now, I recommend to leave blend always at 0, but if you really do need to blend in your noise reduction, don't go above 50. Now, let's get back to setting up the temporal threshold, and also let's zoom into 200%. choose our sweet spot somewhere around here. And also set up the parade. If you don't see it, click on the graph icon. Where it says waveform, click on the drop-down menu and choose parade. Also, let's expand it by clicking on the enlarge icon. And let's bring it into view. Also, if by default your scopes are in the quad view, just click on the single view and you're all set. Even though you can use your eyes to determine where your noise is in your footage, the parade actually gives you a better reading. Why is that? Because for digital sensors, the colors are just signals of different frequencies and digital noise is no different from them. So the parade will allow us to see the noise inside each color channel, and this is really important because once you see that the noise is gone from your color, you can stop moving the chroma and luma sliders. And this will result in our best settings for that scene or for the entire video. Now for the scene in our tutorial, it seems that a luma of value 10 and a chroma of value 8.6 solve our noise in all three channels, as we can see in the scopes and in the viewer. Now we can move to the second step in our order of operations, and that is spatial noise reduction. Here, the mode menu lets us choose between three different types of denoising. Faster is good for lower radius and threshold settings, but may produce artifacts when you set these settings at high values. Better produces better results than faster at the expense of being more processor intensive to render. And finally, enhance. This one gives you superior results compared to better and faster, at the cost of more resources than better, but it will also give you the ability to unlink the spatial threshold luma and chroma the same way faster does. Better, on the other hand, does not allow you to unlink them. Here I recommend you to use enhance because it gives you the best results out of all, and you also get the flexibility for spatial threshold. But if your computer cannot handle the enhanced mode, then choose better. Next is radius, and here we have three options. Small offers great real-time performance and can provide good quality when using low luma and chroma threshold values, but you might see aliasing or artifacts in regions of detail. Medium provides suitable quality for most images when using medium noise reduction threshold settings, and large gives you higher quality within areas of greater visual detail at high luma and chroma threshold values, but it will be at the expense of slower performance. Here I recommend to use medium because you get the best of both worlds in terms of quality and performance speed. Now, spatial threshold and spatial blend behave the same way as temporal threshold and temporal blend, but the spatial threshold has a rule of thumb you should follow, and that is to set the luma values and chroma values to half or double the luma and chroma values from the temporal threshold. So in our case, let's set spatial luma to 15 and spatial chroma to 12. And we do this not as the best settings to use, but as the best settings to create a starting point. So I'm gonna start from 15 and see if I really need to use spatial threshold. I'm checking the parade and also spatial chroma to see if I really need to increase them or decrease them, or if I need to use them at all. Because sometimes temporal threshold can solve your noise in your footage and you don't need to use spatial threshold, but that's not always the case. You do this because, like I previously said, spatial noise reduction takes care of what temporal noise reduction can't. So if the values of the temporal noise reduction are not enough, you bring in the spatial noise reduction with half or double the value of the temporal NR values, and then adjust accordingly. Now that we have covered how to apply noise removal to your footage, let's move on to when, where, and how to best implement it in your workflow. For the free version, if you're using a picture profile like standard or natural or whatever your camera offers, then the order of operations in Resolve is like this. You place your footage on the timeline, you jump into Fusion, shift spacebar, remove noise, shift, click, and drag it in between, set your noise reduction, and then jump into the color page to do whatever grading you need to do. But if you work with log footage, then you have to do a bit of a workaround. First, you have to go to the color page and apply your LUT if you're working with LUTs. Otherwise, use the color space transform. Then go back to the edit page, right click on the footage and choose compound clip or fusion clip. Either works. Now you go to Fusion and apply your noise removal. And after this, you can go back to your color page and continue your color grade. You have to do this workaround for the log footage because of two main reasons. Number one, log footage needs to be transformed to Rec 709 first before you apply noise reduction or any other type of color grade. And that has to be done in the color page. And number 2 is the order of operations of the pages within DaVinci Resolve. And that order looks like this. Everything from the edit page can go to both Fusion and the color page and come back to the edit page. But if you send your clip to the Fusion page to do a text animation, for example, and then you go to the color page with the same clip, Fusion will also send the text animation to the color page. And if you start color grading, you're going to color grade your animation as well, even if you do not want to do that. This is why you have to go through the workaround that I showed you. Now for the studio version, things are a bit simpler. If you're working with normal footage, just go to the color page, go to your motion effects palette, make your denoise, and then right click on the first node, add serial, and continue your color grade. If you work with log footage and you use LUTs, then apply your LUT on the second node. So add serial, add your LUT, and then on your first node, you start doing your denoise. If you're not using LUTs, but you're using the color space transform, then create a second node, go to the effects, grab your color space transform, place it on the first node and on the second node, click on the first node, and for input, use your camera color space. For me is Panasonic V Gamut, for you might be Canon or Sony. For input gamma, again, Panasonic V-Log. Here it would be S-Log or C-Log or F-Log, whatever your camera is. For output color space, we're gonna set it to DaVinci Wide Gamut and Gamma DaVinci Intermediate. Now we move to the second node, and for input, we're gonna set DaVinci Wide Gamut and DaVinci Intermediate. And for output, we're gonna set it to Rec 709 and output Gamma 2.4. You do this entire process because the DaVinci color space is larger than Rec 709 and also larger than what your camera offers. So you take your footage, send it to a larger color space where you have a lot of information to work with, which you really need when you do noise removal, and then you take it from that large color space and package it for broadcast. In this case, the internet, where Rec 709 is the most used color space. After the CSTs are set, add a serial node in between. So right click, add node, add serial node. Let's right click and give it a label, and R for noise removal. And here we're gonna do our noise removal. And still within the CSTs, we're gonna add another serial node and start grading our footage. Now let's talk about how to properly sharpen your footage after you denoise it. For both versions, go to the color page and using the middle toolbar, click on the droplet and triangle icon, which is the blur palette. Here you have the blur, sharpen, and mist tools. Let's select the sharpen because this is what we need. And here we have radius, HV ratio, and scaling. Radius is the primary control for adding sharpness if you lower the values, or blur if you increase the values. If you leave it at 50, there is no blur or sharpness applied. HV ratio, which stands for horizontal or vertical ratio, is responsible for affecting the image on the horizontal axis or vertical axis. For example, if I have a high blur applied and I want to use the HV ratio to direct this blur, I'm going to increase it to direct it mostly on the horizontal axis, or if I want it on the vertical axis. Use the HV ratio only if you need to redirect the blur on one of the axes, otherwise don't even touch it. And lastly, scaling multiplies the amount of scaling being applied by the radius when you apply the sharpening operation. So basically, if you increase the sharpness all the way to the max, you can use it to scale it up or scale it down. It's basically like an intensity slider for the radius. Now, if your radius is at 0.50 or above, scaling does not work. It only works when you apply sharpening. Now, how to use them is actually really simple and really easy. Go above your viewer and select the highlight option, and then choose AB, which is the highlight difference. Now, let's grab our radius and drag it all the way down. And this is how sharpening looks at full force. Now, let's grab it and drag it up. And usually for radius, the best setting is to keep it between 0.40 and 0.50 to bring back your details and not turn your footage into a VHS digital sharpness mess. Now, if this is good enough, you are done. But if you need to refine the sharpness you applied, let's turn on the highlight back and let's grab the scaling and drag it down until we see our sharpness getting closer and closer to the details we want to sharpen. Now, this seems to do the trick. Let's check it without the highlights. Also, while you're working with radius and scaling, don't forget to toggle on and off your highlights to see the results. Let's zoom in a little bit. Click on the node, Control or Command D to toggle it off and on. Let's go back to fit and let's see. Yes, this looks perfect. Now you can add noise reduction after you color grade, but like I said throughout this video, Digital noise is also found in your color information, not just in your shadows or highlights. So if you color grade first and then apply noise reduction, there is a chance that you might lose some color information. And that is something you do not want. But what you might want is to get better at DaVinci Resolve, and you can do that right here.